A cold wind sweeps across the Manchurian plains in the winter of 1939. A Japanese soldier, exhausted after days without sleep, reaches into his uniform and pulls out a tiny glass vial. Moments later, his eyes sharpen, his breath steadies, and he marches forward with unnatural energy. He doesn't know it, but he and millions like him are becoming part of one of the most consequential chemical stories in modern history. A story that begins in a laboratory, travels through war zones and counterculture clubs, and ends woven into the fabric of global health and crime. This is the twisted, unlikely journey of methamphetamine. Long before it fueled armies or ignited epidemics, methamphetamine began quietly with a small plant, Ephedra sinica. For thousands of years, healers in ancient China used its wiry stems to treat coughs and asthma. They didn't know its active ingredient, ephedrine, would one day spark scientific curiosity far beyond traditional medicine. In 1893, a Japanese chemist named Nagai Nagayoshi isolated ephedrine, fascinated by its stimulating effects. But his work hinted at something more. Scientists across Europe began experimenting, searching for a cleaner, more potent compound. In 1919, a Japanese pharmacologist named Akira Ogata did just that. Working in Tokyo, using rudimentary equipment by today's standards, he created a new synthetic stimulant crystal clear, odorless, and far stronger than anything found in nature, methamphetamine. It was powerful, efficient, and deceptively easy to produce. But at first, it sat on shelves and in journals, a scientific curiosity without a clear purpose. That changed in the 1930s, when pharmaceutical companies began marketing stimulant tablets for fatigue, depression, weight loss, and even nasal congestion. In Germany, it was sold under a name that would soon become infamous, Pervitin. Advertisements showed smiling housewives and overworked office clerks revitalized by a small white pill. One ad triumphantly declared it Germany's cheerfulness medication, but behind the cheerful posters, military strategists were paying attention. As Europe marched toward war, Nazi doctors realized Pervitin could keep soldiers awake for days, reduce fear, and increase aggression. Entire divisions were supplied with millions of tablets. During the 1940 invasion of France, German tank crews and pilots buzzing with chemically induced stamina pushed deep into enemy territory in record time. British and American forces soon followed with their own stimulant programs. The world's most devastating conflict had become, in part, a chemically enhanced war. Meanwhile, in Japan, methamphetamine known as Philipon became central to the Imperial Army's operations. Soldiers, pilots, and even factory workers used it to maintain impossible workloads. It wasn't uncommon for kamikaze pilots to swallow high doses before their final missions. Some historians argue that methamphetamine was as essential to wartime logistics as fuel or ammunition. But wars end, and stimulants linger. After Japan's surrender in 1945, leftover military stockpiles flooded the streets. An entire generation stumbled into addiction, sparking what may have been the first major methamphetamine epidemic in history. Authorities eventually cracked down, but the chemical had already seeped into society. By the 1950s in the United States, methamphetamine had become a legal prescription drug. Dentists, truckers, college students, and even dieters used pills with bland, clinical labels just another tool in the medicine cabinet. Hollywood icons and jazz musicians embraced amphetamines as pep pills, their popularity quietly spreading through boarding houses, music halls, and military bases. During the Korean War, U.S. forces used stimulants heavily, continuing a wartime pattern many soldiers never fully left behind. Then came the 1960s. Counterculture movements latched onto amphetamines for marathon parties, road trips, and nights of rebellious energy. Motorcycle gangs discovered crude, homemade methods to produce meth, often using readily available chemicals like cough syrup and household solvents. This marked the transformation of methamphetamine from a pharmaceutical product into an illicit, underground drug. By the 1980s and 1990s, the scene shifted again. In rural America, Small, mom-and-pop labs emerged, ramshackle sheds and kitchen operations producing volatile batches of meth. News segments featured scorched homes and hazmat suits. Yet, the rise of domestic labs was only one chapter. A far more significant shift was happening thousands of miles away. Criminal organizations in Mexico refined large-scale production, creating higher purity meth at lower cost. These networks industrialized the process, shipping enormous quantities across the border. Methamphetamine became cheaper, stronger, and more widely available than ever before. Communities that had never encountered meth suddenly faced long-term addiction, overwhelmed hospitals, and strained law enforcement. Meanwhile, scientists continued uncovering the drug's effects on the brain. They traced how meth floods neural pathways with dopamine, creating a surge of euphoria while slowly damaging the very circuits responsible for pleasure and motivation. They saw how chronic use could change behavior, decision-making, and even the way the brain responds to reward. Meth's legacy, once tied to scientific curiosity and wartime necessity, now merged with stories of personal struggle, family trauma, and community resilience. Yet, it would be a mistake to see the history of methamphetamine as just a story of decline. Throughout its tangled past, meth has occupied a strange middle ground. Born from medicine, embraced by militaries, misused by societies, and fought by public health advocates and policymakers around the world. It's a stark reminder that chemistry doesn't create heroes or villains, people do. Today, methamphetamine remains both a regulated medical treatment in tiny controlled doses and a global illicit drug with enormous social impact. Its history is a mirror reflecting scientific ambition, human vulnerability, and the unintended consequences of innovation. From ancient herbal remedies to wartime factories, from pharmacy shelves to clandestine superlabs, methamphetamine's story isn't just about a drug. It's about the complicated choices societies make when confronted with power, temptation, and the promise of performance. And somewhere in that story, between the vials carried by soldiers and the pills sold to civilians, lies a deeper question. How does a substance intended to heal become one that harms? The answer is written not just in chemistry textbooks, but in the people and eras that shaped methamphetamine's path through history, a path still unfolding today.